Good morning.
Morning.
We'll be here all day, or I will anyway. Be casual, relax, enjoy yourself. If you need to get up and move around, that's great. And get some just tea in the other room and stuff. And especially if you need to use the bathroom, I recommend use it whenever you need to. That way we can avoid long lines and when we knock off for a break. The reason why authentic spirituality is so difficult is as though there were two different things going on simultaneously that basically have nothing to do with each other. And yet, typically, we assume they do. We expect them to. We think that it does. Which is a disastrous and completely confusing and befuddling mistake. Because in fact, they have nothing whatsoever to do with each other. These two things are, on the one hand, this actuality. In a way, the less said about it, the better. You all know it intimately. In fact, you all know absolutely nothing but it, because there's nothing but it to know. It alone exists. Everything, if there was any things that exists whatsoever, is this that is here. However, the fly in the ointment is this seeming otherness. And what it is and how it is what it is unfathomably strange and not graspable, because of course what it actually is this itself, which is unfathomably strange and ungraspable. But this other pretends to be graspable. It seems to be graspable. It consists of what seems to be the human urge to analyze, the human urge to get a handle on things, the human urge to figure out what's going on, to describe, to name, to designate, to plan, to deconstruct and structuralize, and so on and so forth. We're all very familiar with that. You know, and these words on a superficial level are evidence of that. From this other perspective, this perspective of, call it human analysis, that's all language seems to be. Language is the pretense of, I'm saying these words, and these words somehow, semi-relevantly refer to some actuality with some accuracy, with some relevance. That's the pretense. From this second perspective of human analysis, of human conceptualization, that's all bread and butter. That makes perfect sense. It's completely obvious. The fly in the ointment is it's completely untrue. It's not like that at all. So your typical spiritual alien mode to normal human thought. It's a very alien mode to normal human orientation. And so essentially this path consists of the discovery that one is not a human being. That human beings aren't human beings. Because of course humanness, human beinghood is itself a concept, is itself an orientation that does not actually exist. You know, what you are cannot be said. It's absolutely inconceivable. But it doesn't need to be said because it's right here, completely actualized, completely explicitly revealed, plain to see, as long as you don't hold it to be any particular way at all. And paradoxically, even if you do hold it to be some particular way, it still isn't that, and it still is plainly revealed. So this situation is most peculiar because the actual condition is never concealed. The actual condition is already completely realized. It's already completely known. It's already being completely engaged with, and there is no alternative. There's nothing else. There is no non-actuality. It cannot be present. Only actuality exists. Actuality is actual. And anything that wasn't actual, which is a total fantasy, is obviously not actual, so it's not a thing. And of course, this is already always being fully engaged with, there being no alternative. And even all of the confusion and conundrum and misorientation generated by analysis and the fantasy of resolvability, the fantasy that it is possible to get a handle on something, and all the subsequent handle getting that follows from that, is itself nothing other than this actuality. It's being done by this actuality, it consists of this actuality, but it of course is not what it seems to be from the perspective of this analytical mode, from the perspective of this mode of supposing that you can have a clue. So this is the conundrum. How to see what you're already seeing, how to realize what you've already realized, and especially how to let go of the fact that you are continually misapprehending it from the unending bullshit spinning of human mentality, which never stops. I mean, a realized yogi doesn't stop thinking, doesn't stop being a complete idiot. This is inherent in the nature of human personality, which seems to be an inherent aspect of the way actuality shows up in this particular bardo. So realization is a very strange condition. Realization is a condition of a deluded idiot running around thinking they have a clue in the context of and consisting entirely of a completely transhuman, transcendental actuality that is always explicitly present and revealed. So, you know, a realization could be said to be a very kind of a schizophrenic actuality. And the fantasy, of course, of the aspirant is you're going to move from this to that. You're going to move from, you know, deluded analysis into transcendental openness and revelation. But this is not the case. You don't ever get to leave delusion behind. Delusion is an aspect of reality, one of the major aspects of reality. Reality itself is a confusion, it's a noise generator, it's a confusion generator. It endlessly spins off erroneous implications of itself. And basically that's all it's doing. So all of this information that bombards your sensoria and your experiential field, that seems to be the basis for supposing that things exist and situations exist and events are happening and so on and so forth. is being done by actuality, consists of nothing but actuality, and in fact does not come together into actually being the things and events and conditions that it may seem to imply to this analytical mode. So delusion and confusion is the very present revelation and display of actuality, which is why actuality is not, well, it's not why, but it is evidence, further evidence or fundamental evidence of the way in which actuality is not resolvable, it's not graspable. Because something that is not actually any particular some way is obviously not actually graspable as being that way. And actuality is no way, even though it's generating an infinite, continual field of implications, that it is infinite ways. And of course we're all very familiar how effortlessly the consciousness seizes on these implications and virtually actualizes them, and all of a sudden, through a sort of this hypnotic mechanism, it seems like you're a person living in a world with a life and a history and all the complexities and problems, and life sucks, and what am I going to do about it? All of which is just innuendo and implication of transcendental, completely incoherent subtle energy, which alone exists, which alone is present. So that's what we're up against, to the extent we're up against anything, which we aren't, which is kind of good news. So, but anyhow, if we were up against something, that would be it. So in practice, so here we are, we're hanging out in this room for the day, or I'll be here all day. You guys can, leave and discuss at any point, of course.
Of course.
So what do you do with this? I recommend engagement. I recommend don't treat this event like you're an audience and I'm a performer. Treat this event like you're here and this is an opportunity to look at this shit. This is an opportunity to say, wait a minute. I get this, but, and if there's any but, then talk about it, bring it up. Be a participant, and that way you'll get the most bang for your buck in terms of looking at this stuff and exploring it with an eye to seeing through it. Or more accurately, with an eye to noticing that you are already seeing through it. And so on that note, I invite you to give me your butts, figuratively speaking.
Well, Peter, if you...
Just a sec, Stephen?
Hey, Peter. So, radiant presence, completely ungraspable.
Yeah.
And yet, here we are, as you say, talking about this. It seems to quickly devolve into a paradox of, if there's radiant presence, which is only one thing, if you call it that, then there's this sense, there's still this sense of individuation to some degree. I mean, we're having this conversation. So, how to deal with that? This is a question I've asked you before, and as usual, my question's falling apart as I ask you, but I'll continue on. There's the understanding of what you're saying, and then in understanding that, it would imply that there is no separate self. Yet, one of the ways this presents is as a fairly strong sense of self.
Right.
So how to deal with that?
Okay. There's nothing present but what I call a radiant presence arbitrarily. Doesn't matter what you call it because it is what it is. Period. That being the case, what is apparent sense of self? Well, the answer is obviously radiant presence. You know, what is the conundrum of how to deal with it? The answer is obviously radiant presence. Now, the real question that you're asking might be, well, why does it look like that? Why does it look like it's this seemingly convincing, you know, implication of self, convincing implication of self? And why does it seem to have various conundrums appended to it or associated with it? Well, why is not a relevant question. What is the relevant question? Because why supposes logic, it supposes structurality, it supposes cause and effect, none of which actually exist. But what could be said to exist in a more accurately, completely inaccurately, but more accurately? And what is the nature of radiance? Radiance is, as I said, an endless innuendo and implication generator. So anything that seems to be anything is nothing other than a seeming being generated by and consisting of solely of radiance. So radiance peculiarly seems to have an aspect where it seems to be a self, and it may seem to have an aspect where the self may seem to be localized, and this localization may seem to include embodiment, and may seem to include history, and may seem to include space and time and cause and effect and blah blah blah, whatever you want. But the operative word there is seems. Radiance is a seeming generator. It's an implication generator. It's an innuendo generator. It doesn't show up plain vanilla. It never shows up plain vanilla. It endlessly, seemingly spin doctors itself into all sorts of seeming flavors and implications, none of which ever actually become anything other than radiance. The condition is exactly like a dream, precisely like a dream. In a dream, of course, there's nothing present but dreaming, but because of the nature of dreaming as an innuendo generator, there can seem to be all sorts of forms and shapes and entities and interactions and situations and complexities and, narratives and emotional reactivity and blah, blah, blah. And then you wake up, you can see perfectly clearly that none of it was ever there. It was just a dream. And all of that seeming complexity and seeming concreteness was innuendo. It seems to be that way. It convincingly and powerfully and palpably and juicily seems to be that way. But all of this convincing and palpable and juicy and concreteness is of the nature of the radiance. Because radiance is concrete. Radiance is the only concrete there is. That's what radiance feels like. There's nothing there but radiance. That's radiance. Radiance can be hard. Radiance can be sharp. Radiance can be hot. Radiance can hurt. But all of that is never anything one iota more than radiance. Just like hardness in a dream and hotness in a dream and sharpness in a dream is absolutely nothing more than dreaming. There's nothing present other than dreaming in a dream. And all of the rest is seeming. And the seeming is not something in addition to radiance. The seeming is of the very essence of what radiance is. Radiance is not a thing that then subsequently seems to be seeming. What is radiating is an unending transcendental field of implication, field of seemings. That's what radiance is. And the fact that it happens to seemingly concretize as, perhaps a self or an embodiment or whatever, is inscrutable. You can't, it's not like you can make sense of it or get a handle on why that should be so. The important point is to see that what it actually is, which is that it's not actually anything coming into being. It's not actually any particularized and findable conditions. It's a field of implication, which none of what is implied can actually be found, and even the implying itself cannot be found. And the essence of the motive energy, if you want to call it, that is generating this implication can't be found. The entire thing is nowhere, and yet it's as concrete and actual as it gets because that's what there is. So it's a very strange condition. But there's no dichotomy whatsoever between the way what it seems to be and what it is, even though the one seems to be very concrete and explicit and delimited and so on, and the other seems to be completely transcendental and weird and so on and so forth. And yet they are one and the same, not a hair's breadth of difference.
Thank you.
Sure.
So was the other part of the conundrum, that the labeling of things that aren't really that. If to be in my day or whatever, without the concepts, the labels, but just more of the being.
No, it's not a matter of being without the labels and without the concepts. The labels and the concepts are the being. The being is all of the innuendo. But the innuendo does not ever become what the labels and the concepts imply that it is. It's empty implication without any basis.
So could you just say that last part?
This is a cup. It's a cup because it's being labeled a cup, but there's no cup here. All there is the labeling, and the labeling is the seeming. It seems to be a cup.
Oh.
But you can't find the cup, and you can't find the seeming of it being a cup. But here's the cup.
Is it? Okay,
There's no dichotomy. There's
That's
just
what I'm
absolutely
getting
no
hung up.
dichotomy.
That's where I'm getting hung. I'm grasping the seeming. If you said, but there's no cup. I mean, there's something there.
No,
There's nothing.
there's nothing there.
Even if you took away the label.
Well, it's not nothing. Nothing is negated, but there's nothing to negate. Okay, suppose we're having this whole thing, we've just been going through the last couple of minutes. All of a sudden, a bell rings and you realize, and you wake up in your bed and you realize, oh, I was dreaming that. Was there a cup there? The whole conversation could happen. We're talking about the cup. It seems to be a cup. We're calling it a cup, but there's no cup there. And then you wake up and you go, oh yeah, of course there's no cup there. It was a dream. When you go to sleep, where does the cup go? When you go to sleep, where does the whole world go? When you die, where does it all go? It goes right where it always was. It was never here. All that is here is the seeming. That's the only thing that's findable. Or let's say that's the only thing that's obvious.
But even in the dream, the cup, the warmth of it, whatever I felt,
Yeah.
right? So then I might wake up thirsty or in reaction to all of that.
Sure.
So it seems to me that the cup or whatever it is, like my mind put together all the light coming off it into shapes and circles and constructed something up called a cup.
Right.
But and that is the seeming aspect of it. Now that has an impact on me, as in that has the story continues from that seeming.
Right.
And that story seems to be there even after you kind of have lost that, as in it's a continuity.
Well, it's a seeming continuity. Absolutely. Seeming continuity is very peculiar. And of course, this is very seductive to us because seeming continuity is the strongest argument for physics and cause and effect and objectivity and everything else. But seeming continuity is, in fact, just as seeming as everything else because it cannot actually be found. If you look very closely at continuity, it's actually made up of discontinuity. It's very strange. It's a very strange phenomenon. And, you know, in fact, in quantum physics and all that, they're coming up against these actualities on the level of hard science, on the level of, you know, measurement and state-of-the-art instrumentation and so on and so forth. But you don't need all that because you also come up against it continually, just in your experience, with exactly as much precision. You don't need the instruments to see that there is an infinite degree of seeming coherence, seeming continuity. But if you look very closely at that, you can't actually find it because it's all made up of discontinuity. It's a very strange condition.
So I can look at an object, I can stare at it for a while, and things will start to get fuzzy. What exactly it is won't become clear. But along with that, there's this deep irritation that it has to somehow collapse. There's a stubbornness that I don't know what to do with.
Right. But see, that's like I was talking about earlier, that's a subtler layer of expecting it to be graspable, expecting it to make sense, expecting to get a handle on it. So if it's nothing, then you can have a subtler grasping that it's got to be nothing. I want some goddamn nothing served to me. Give me my nothing. I want to get to my nothing and have it, and here's my nothing. But even that is a fantasy of resolution. You can't find anything, but you can't find nothing. You cannot find any condition, but you cannot find the negation of any condition either. It's very, very peculiar condition. It's a very, very peculiar situation. And unfortunately, you cannot see it, let's say, clearly, except as it is, which involves letting go into infinite paradox and infinite irrationality. Which again, subtly and strangely, does not involve leaving rationality and analysis behind. Rationality and analysis are actually completely irrational. So they fit in very nicely with this craziness.
Yeah, it's really only peculiar from the standpoint of seeming.
Exactly. It's peculiar if you're used to thinking that it makes any kind of sense at all, then the fact that it makes no sense is peculiar relative to that. But you were in error in the first instance. So there's actually no findable perspective, no justifiable perspective from which this can be seen to be weird, because there's no non-weirdness that can be found. But typically, we think there is, typically one thinks that, well, yeah, but the world kind of makes sense in some way, and I've got some kind of handle on it. So from that point of view, God, this is fucking weird. This is, it couldn't really be that way. But the error isn't in how weird this is. The error is in thinking that you have some tiny platform of non-weirdness to stand on, from which to throw stones at the weirdness. But it's particularly insidious in terms of our logic, because it's not too hard to see that, oh yeah, I get it, it's kind of like that, but then it's so seductive to draw some kind of implication from that, like with the cup. I can see the cup's not really there, so that means there's no cup. It's like, no, I can see the cup's not really there, period. It doesn't mean anything. There's no implication, there's no structure. It's just that's another seeming. There's a cup, seems to be. No cup, seems to be. Can't find a cup, seems to be. But you can't But it's not, oh, so therefore there is no cup. No. Sort of naive spirituality often comes up to this conundrum, but there is no self. Discover that there's no self, and you'll be, released. But it's not that simple. There's as much of a self as there ever was. Yeah, there's no self, but there's no non-self. It's not like self is negated. There's no self to negate. Can it look like self? Sure. Can it look like embodiment? Sure. Can it look like objective space and time? Sure. Can you actually find any of those things? No. But does that mean you need to erase them or stop them? No, they're not there to stop or erase. And just because from certain perspectives it can seem to be. In other words, there's endless perspectives, and from any perspective, things seem to be a certain way. And all perspectives are equal, and no perspective is true. Well, it could be
I
simple.
notice as you're talking that I'm continually going, therefore.
Right, of course you are, you're a human being.
Therefore,
Yeah, that's what the mind does.
Yeah.
And it will never stop, and it doesn't need to stop. Because that very activity is just more seeming. It's more endless, irrational weirdness. And it doesn't actually have any traction. I mean, it doesn't actually do anything.
Therefore.
Is there anything about doing this yoga with that desire, with that pull to resolve? And is that desire to resolve something that you see as needing to go away, or is that something that stays with the human?
Generically, nothing needs to go away, first of all. That's fine. I mean, it doesn't matter what the way things seem to be at any particular point are irrelevant. There can be an intense desire and yearning for penetrating this yoga and achieving, whatever. That's all very good. But then that becomes the basis of your investigation. So what is this intense desire? What is this yearning? What is it that I expect to achieve or not achieve, and so on? And again, all of those will fall apart as objects of the yoga. They don't get negated. They just can't be found. But this is one of the subtler aspects that in practice one comes up against. The subtle assumption that just because something can't be found, it needs to be canceled out definitively. And that's not the case. Because any perspective is viable in its own terms, and no perspective is true. So the perspective of, oh yes, I'm a burning yogi, I'm working it, I'm doing it, I'm really just slicing away at samsara, and I'm like, God is just about to flash me, God is flashing me right now, Cool, great. That's a very cool perspective, but it has no hierarchy as being better or worse than any other perspective, and it's not true, because no perspective is true. Any perspective is just a pseudo coherence of a framework of seemings, or the technical term I often use for that is what do I call it? Conceptual framework. Do I call it that? Some kind of framework. The word framework's in there somewhere. I need to go over my past notes. If I kept any notes, Joey.
I've got it.
Okay, good. Well, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, interpretive framework. That's it.
That's it.
That's a good technical phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah, but any perspective is just an interpretive framework, and it can be really elaborate, like the modern materialist worldview. Bang! I mean, mega elaborate conceptual framework. The world exists, space and time exist, causality exists, laws of physics exist. Because of the laws of physics, DNA has evolved, and DNA has evolved these ever complex life forms in this physical biosphere that exists because of the Big Bang, and blah 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 blah. And consciousness is an implicative byproduct of a certain kind of, bioelectrical activity in the central nervous system. And I mean, talk about an intricate megalomaniac, interpretive framework. But it's all hogwash. It's fine. It's not irrelevant. That's a perfectly viable perspective to see this on. But it's just any perspective is a viable perspective, and no perspective is true.
So Peter, when you say that the seeming is the radiant presence, the interpretive framework, that's all radiant presence, delusion. But
Good.
okay, but if we don't know, but if we know that, if we see that, then maybe that could be called realization. When you see that the seeming continues, but you see it as it's happening, rather than.
Well, it's slipperier than that, because you can never see it. That's just another seeming. That's just another perspective.
Yeah.
And seeing that, you can see that you can never see it. In a very profound sense, realization is the discovery that there is no such thing.
Well, how about knowing that?
Well, everything is known.
Yeah, well, I mean, the seeming has happened, and you think, okay, we're in this room, all this stuff's happening, all this is real, this is very mysterious stuff.
Right.
But then if you know that, if you know that it's just seeming to happen, it's not, is that different? I mean, is that,
Yes. Discovering discovering that all that exists is seeming is powerful. Not discovering it conceptually, but discovering it as it is. Even that discovery is itself just seeming. I mean, it's continually, infinitely self-referential, self-reflexive. So, I mean, it's endlessly strange.
Peter, I read somewhere a while back that there's the subtlety of this is such that it won't support the extremes on either end of things that you say, I'm not this, I am this. It's something much more subtle.
Well, there are subtleties, but there's no ends.
Right.
That's the problem, is
solvable.
seeing it as a spectrum that has ends is a fallacy. Subtlety is fine, there's infinite subtlety. But nothing is supported. The ends aren't supported, the middle isn't supported.
Yeah, it's unresolvable too.
Yeah.
It's sort of, it's more and more and more subtle.
Yeah.
And still you never see that.
The only thing that's certain is unresolvability, and even that is unresolvable. That there is nothing but unresolvability is itself unresolvable, so even that's not certain. It's very strange.
Yeah. Makes you laugh.
Well, it does make you laugh. Laughter is the appropriate response to it.
Something that really clicked for me that you said just a moment ago with all of this is the problem being everything that's being thought of or conceived. I mean, it's all self-referential. It's all relating to, and that's what you're talking about, perspective. As long as there's a self-reference, there's this perspective.
No. What I meant by self-referential is it applies to itself.
Oh, maybe I don't understand.
So unresolvability applies to itself in that even unresolvability is itself unresolvable. When I say self-referential, I wasn't referring to a self in particular, although all of that is also self-referential, because everything is ultimately self-referential. In other words, you can't say anything about anything from a privileged position. When you say something about something, what you're saying about applies to the thing from the point of view from which you're saying it as well.
How does anyone speak then, including you?
Speaking's not a problem.
But the discovery, the knowledge, I mean, is there a claim there?
And
I mean,
there is nothing but claim, and the claim is of reality. Speech is the claim of actuality. Speech can happen because it can happen. And speech isn't speech. You know, if a human might pretend speech is when, you know, life forms make sounds to each other and use these sounds to embody meaningfulness and refer to objective reality, you know, whatever. You can define it any way you want. But that's not what it actually is, of course. What it actually is, it can't be said. You don't know what it is. I mean, here we are, we're talking, it's happening. You know, and it's as good as any speaking. How does it happen? What's happening? Those questions are unanswered. You know, not because they're special questions. Every question is unanswerable because you can't resolve exactly what anything is, or how it is, or even that it is, which doesn't negate it or cancel it out. It just leaves it as a question mark. All there is question mark.
So is in the context of what your perception or perspective is self-realization a word that you use?
If I use that word, if I use that, I probably use that word. Yeah, it's a word I use. Sure.
So from there, self-realization has occurred. How is that different then from understanding on an intellectual level, or even an energetic level, what you're saying here?
It's not even a tiny bit different. There's nothing but realization. And realization is the realization that there is nothing but realization. Realization is not the achievement of some special condition. Realization is the discovery that there's nothing but. And then you're a clueless nerd as you always were. I don't mean you, I mean more. But some hypothetical clueless nerd out there is a clueless nerd. And yeah, so what? That's what realization looks like. That's what transcendental actuality looks like, if it looks that way. But it isn't. It may look that way, but of course it isn't that way, because any appearance is just a perspective, which does not have a privileged position relative to any other infinite possible perspectives.
As realization and as radiant presence, that says nothing, there's nothing that is hierarchical. Any interpretive framework is just as good as any other.
Precisely.
From the truth of the mystery.
Absolutely, and none of them are true, and every one of them is valuable and meaningful.
Equally valuable and equally non-true.
Yes.
Equally non-hierarchical.
Exactly so.
That's not really very useful.
It is useful in two ways, I would argue. Number one, usefulness is true, and truth is the only power.
Yeah.
Number two, it's useful because it gives you absolute flexibility.
Yeah, free and total free.
Yeah, you can jump into any perspective or any interpretive framework arbitrarily as a matter of convenience.
Right, and it's not.
Which makes you entertaining at parties.
Yeah.
Very useful.
Well, the third useful thing I think means I don't have to get involved in an argument.
That's right. You don't have, or you're free to.
Yeah.
You know, it's all good.
There's no dog and no fight.
Well, that's why it's called liberation, because when you see that that no interpretive framework is any more privileged than any other, you're free to just gravitate to whatever one you find preferable for whatever reason, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And you're not stuck, again, having to defend anything or anything else. You know, so you're liberated from any particular actuality.
And you're not stuck with having to ask someone else to do it.
You're just not stuck, period.
You're not stuck.
Yeah, you're not stuck. And yet you're free to do anything. You're free to get in a fight. You're free to argue. You're free to disagree. You're free to be a jerk or whatever. It doesn't matter. That's another aspect of liberation. You're free from all the weight of any supposed objective truth. So you get to roll your own to the extent you can roll your own.
I'm a really huge language lover, and that's been sort of an issue with this whole path that reminded me of what you were saying, Jill, is it seemed like somehow I liked something that was kind of like, you know, it was like porn or something, you know, because it's so mental. It's such a mental thing. And that's recently really fallen away for me hugely. But I had an experience the other night, just one of those, I don't know where, who knows, whatever. But I was thinking about something. It was kind of benign, just the, you know. And it was like all of a sudden there was kind of two parts to it. One part was I could see how language, you know, like thinking is sort of like words without sound for me. I could see how it was actually just in real time constructing the illusion of continuity. It was, but instead of it seeming like, oh God, what a drag, it was so amazing. It was so, I mean, it was one of those times when that word you use often, intelligence, was so clear to me. There was nothing to do with it, really. I'm not getting anywhere special with it, except that it was phenomenal. And just the power of it. Mind-blowing. And then interestingly, just what that segued into was this incredible stillness. Not to be confused with quiet. It was just profoundly still.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have, there's no conclusion there. I just.
Well, you know.
Oh, I know. I was just, but what I did think about was that it seems like a lot of this at a certain point just becomes about settling down with paradox. With here, I mean, right now, what am I doing right now? I'm stringing that little, like we're crossing over a bridge that means something's continuous. It's very paradoxical.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all about, you know, this is of the essence, it's all about learning to be comfortable with paradox. Or especially learning to see that discomfort with paradox is absurd because there's nothing but. You know, discomfort with paradox would make sense if there was some alternative, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, and you know, one ultimately comes to a sense of effortless, you know, I wouldn't call it stillness, particularly in terms of the way I would express it, but just effortless ease, because it doesn't matter, nothing matters, and it does itself effortlessly, so whatever you're doing, it happens. You know, have a conversation, or you sit and have a beer, or you get in a fight with somebody, or whatever. You know, shit happens, and it does itself, and what could be easier? And there's no importance. It's not like anything actually means anything relative to anything else.
Yeah.
So there's just an ease. There's a delightful, absolute ease there, which again is the nature of liberation. Liberate, you find you're liberated from effort, from need, from responsibility, from obligation, without negating any of those, if they should happen to seem to occur. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Get up, walk around, use the bathroom, whatever.
What's your name?
Just get across here without tripping on I was just using it so.
Oh, I see.
I'm very ambivalent about that.
Yeah.
Then I wrote it, yeah, because I found when I wrote a book, it's like, I kept thinking of all the books that I could have, and what I would have liked it to be like, and I look at this and I go, ew. But then every time I actually reread it, it's pretty good.
And then,
I can't really call it a scene.
I'm trying to write. But no, clearing it.
There was mud.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, I came to this point of, okay, nothing adds up. Wait a minute. And then I stopped. And so it starts all to be. So then, you know, I've been on this track for a while, and then I'm like, yeah, here it is. It was the right time. So, if there's such a thing, right? But anyway. So she can meet her over. You ready for the one?
I could give you a guess.
yeah, right.
I reckon.
Sunday when you're eating, hanging out, watching TV, and then shower before you go to bed. Sleep with it. That was probably I talked to her about it. I think I would have to shampoo my hair before bed. And all the girls are ready to frizz in the morning. Meetings there's such a variety of different outlooks and different perspectives. So it's kind of yes,
something that's was dualistic. So this kind of, you know, you draw these artificial distinctions, you know, it's all one thing. You don't have to really know, you know, this isn't, doesn't meet your idea of what it should be. You enjoy it, go for it.
So did you?
She's been around. So she's been inside. Yeah, which is what.
morning, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes I'm not with you anymore, so I'm not
Oh, God, that's all I know is to see it. Oh, yeah, she came in a little bit. Yeah. So she.
Yeah, no, like, it's become more part of the relationship.
Okay, you know what?
It's up to
Yeah, I recognize her, but I didn't. So did she?
And then you make it. Oh, yeah.
Where do you guys live?
Peter said at one point, because that was the best Vancouver race to get together. You could be dragged up there.
I'd love to hear about the Vancouver. I love it.
Yes. Yeah, we could drive up there.
Oh, hey.
Yeah,
We'll drag you all up there for once.
Yeah.
You know, your dog is gonna go pretty far, so.
Yeah, I hear.
Just mail me a
Sorry,
free plastic and I'm there.
All right, all right.
Thumbs up from the boss.
I'm the boss. Looking
I have
good.
no sway whatsoever, but, you know. That's right. I see how many people folks in it. You bring no lunch in here. Too bad. So, yeah.
Did I hear you get silver?
All right. Any buts? Buts?
Peter, would you talk to me a little bit, because it helps me to hear it over and over and over and over again. Would you talk to me a little bit about noticing?
Sure.
No.
The essence of noticing is noticing that your experience is beyond your ability to describe it or think of it. You know, the simplest level on which that can occur perhaps is just information density. You know, in other words, I can look and I can say, this is my hand. Okay, then I look at what's there. It's, you know, how much this experientially, this thing I'm calling my hand, you know, how much data is there? Is this data, you know, is there ever, you know, if you took every hard drive that's ever been made throughout the history of computing and downloaded all the information that is present in one instantaneous experience of this, you wouldn't have enough storage space. There's just too much information. And yet, we're used to pretending, oh, it's just my hand, somehow takes all of that infinite, richness of information and somehow deals with it. Okay, that takes care of that. Now I've got a handle on that. And so again, just noticing the information density of experience. I'm in this instance, I'm using perhaps a sensory aspect of experience. You can use any aspect of matter. This is just in terms of information density. You can also look in terms of instantaneousness. You can look at how the experiential data that is present, experiential information that is present has zero duration that it is present for. Whatever you're experiencing is already gone. And what it has become is also already gone, it's already gone. The instant has no duration. Only the present instant of experience exists as it can be found. It has zero duration, and whatever information seems to be being experienced in that instant has already morphed into absolute difference. When you say in the next instant, but there's no next instant. It's actually in that instant. When does the present information morph? Now. It's not like now is here and then it becomes then. Now is already then. And then you can, in that nature, looking at the slipperiness of time. Look at how does time transition from the seeming past into the seeming future? How does event transition from what it seems to be to what it's becoming? And again, you look at the actual concrete experience of all of these phenomena, and it becomes immediately obvious that the most elaborate things you could say or think or write about it is woefully, absurdly inadequate. And you have this immediate actuality that's completely obvious and explicit. It's not concealed at all, which is absolutely mind-bogglingly weird and transcendental. And so on and so forth. You can sort of make a game of looking at any aspect of actual experience and seeing how radically it escapes the way it's ordinarily, or the way it's even possible to think about it or talk about it or whatever.
Yeah, and you said something to me a year or so ago about noticing chops and how you develop that kind of thing, which was really helpful because as a spiritual aspirant, I keep falling back into, well, this presupposes that, and that gets me going down all kinds of bizarre rabbit holes of, logic and implication and all that kind of shit that I can't resolve.
No, once you let logic in the door, you basically.
Yeah, I know. But it's hard not to, for me anyway, it's hard not to devolve back into that.
No, for sure. And again, it's this strange paradox that logic exists in the context of irrationality, and they are one and the same. And even that logic is very irrational. Logic isn't done logically. That logic exists at all, and that logic is being engaged in is itself very irrational and mysterious. Where does that come from?
Yeah, where did that come from?
Yeah, the whole thing is, the whole thing disappears of its own, whatever.
Yeah. Maybe it's not noticing so much as it is remembering.
Remembering that you can't remember. Yeah. Notice that you can't notice.
Yeah.
Notice the fact that whatever you start off doing, you're already doing something else, and you're you're cast adrift and afloat and you're clueless and you know, I mean, that's what actuality is. The very nature of actuality is it's incoherent. It doesn't actually do anything ever or settle down or it's not responsible or functional. It just happens.
Yeah, okay, and that's getting a little closer to it for me, that it seems like the times that I get to understanding maybe that I am completely adrift and moored to nothing. That is liberating.
Notwithstanding the fact that you feel more to all kinds of stuff, and you're not more to that. That just happens or not.
That is liberating.
Yeah, that's all there is. That's as close to liberating as you're going to find.
I kind of think so.
Yeah, there's nothing to achieve. There's nothing to remember. There's nothing to see. The only thing to see is that there's nothing to see, nothing privileged. And even if you don't see that, you know, seeing that or not seeing that isn't privileged either.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah.
If nothing is related to anything else, it happens in this instant and disappears in this instant. There is no relationship from that to anything else.
Right.
It just happens.
Right.
So.
Therefore.
That is like that is a perspective.
Yeah.
And it's a true and powerful and meaningful perspective. But it's not truer or more powerful or more meaningful than alternative perspectives. You can have the perspective everything's connected. And that's just as true and just as powerful and just as meaningful, even though it's a diametrically opposed implication.
What I was going to ask was the idea that anything has kind of a, I think you called it an echo.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. You know, this is a little contrary to your starting point of everything's instantaneous and nothing's connected and blah, blah, blah. A very useful and powerful perspective is that any and all information embodies any and other all information. So any phenomena is a reflection of all other phenomena and is intimately related to it. So this, I mean, we were talking about this last night. Is this one of the ways in which this is rather clearly or rather powerfully evoked is in the myth of Indra's net, for example. And this is also the basis of much psychic technique and much magical technique. If you look at anything, you're actually looking at everything from that point of view. Another perspective.
Yes, that's the echo.
Yeah, so anything is an echo of everything else, both globally and individually. And that is a perspective. It's a powerful and useful perspective, but it's not any truer than the other perspective. Then there's the perspective of nothing exists, everything is instantaneous and absolutely disconnected point event. And that's another powerful and useful perspective, which again is essentially the opposite or one kind of opposition from the previous perspective and so on and so forth. So the trick is to use these perspectives at your convenience, or ignore them at your convenience. You know, then the materialist objectivist hypothesis is another perspective. You know, consensus reality, the world really exists, and you know, blah blah blah. You know, where matter exists, and our consciousness is an accidental spin-off of biochemical events as a result of our DNA evolution in the central nervous system, blah, 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 blah. You know, cool, another perspective, but also very interesting and powerful. You know, and sky's the limit. Well, there's no limit to perspectives, and no perspective is any truer than any other perspective. Every perspective is powerful and meaningful and profound.
So it's a take your pick.
Yeah, take your pick or not.
Or not.
I mean, in actuality, if you look at your experience, sensitively, you'll probably notice what is really happening is you're continually and instantaneously drifting around perspective after perspective after perspective, which we typically call the stream of consciousness or whatever. And so we're all very familiar with this phenomenon, even if we don't, usually dignify it with giving it importance. We usually say, I'm spacing out, my thoughts are going all over the place or whatever.
And it has no inherent, in the take your pick, and radiant presence has no inherent thing, nothing to say about relationship or.
Well, it has everything to say. I mean, there's endless profundity in all of these possible aspects, certain perspectives. From certain other perspectives, these things are canceled out.
They're all equally true.
Yeah, yeah. But nothing is negated. Nothing is, this is one of the most powerful aspects and one of the most surprising aspects of actuality is that nothing is negated. That is this way doesn't mean that it's not that way. That nothing exists doesn't mean we're not sitting here in this room having this conversation on a beautiful day in Seattle. It's not here, it doesn't exist. And here we are. Go figure. But both absolutely true. And the fact that they don't fit in with each other, that's, if there's any real takeaway, is that their fitting in is the least relevant of ideas.
It seems like there's nothing at stake.
Yeah, exactly.
And perspective is really just what arises out of focusing on something at one time or another.
Yeah, or vice versa. Or the focusing of something or other arises from perspective, but that's chicken and the egg, who knows?
Right, yeah. But essentially, there's nothing at stake.
Yeah, no. And yet, from certain perspectives, there can seem to be a lot at stake.
Yeah.
And again, that's valuable and viable within those perspectives. But I would say a very, very useful fact is noticing that perspectives are intrinsically irrational. Even if there's a perspective that you can seem to express in words or imply in words, the actual perspective completely transcends analysis. Experience never collapses down into describability, never collapses down into, resolving as actually being any certain way, even these perspectives. So even in the power of a perspective, the perspective itself is more than your statement of it. And you can never get to the bottom of how much more, because it's infinite.
Can't be explained.
Yeah. So who has, okay, all that's very good and everything, but what about such and such in your life? And, if there seems to be anything in your life whatsoever that is even thinkable as being something in your life, bring it up. Let's play with it. You know, this stuff is useless as theory. The power of it is to play with it, to dance it, to surf with it, not to just sort of sit and, oh, that's really profound. I mean, that's fun, but that's not powerful.
So how about feeling then? So
Yeah.
this is where I get to. Okay, you know, just like what we've been talking about. You know, we held an orange in our hand, we came up with a word for it, called it round. That's a concept from the direct experience of that feeling. Okay, so you know, when I look for the perceiver of that or the experiencer of that, I can't find that one. And so, you know, I'm sort of reducing it all down to that. Just that. It's just that. It's not an orange. It's not round. It's just that. And then I hit kind of a nothing wall, or I don't know what to say, but what's there is just a feeling. What I'm left, my direct experience then is a feeling, to use a word, a feeling of just a feeling of, I mean, if I can see, if I want to describe it, is it resistance? Is it, I mean, there's some frustration there, so there's a little bit of, you know, maybe mild anger, but it's just, I don't know what to say.
And as a reaction to what? Or in relation to what?
In relation to reducing all this down to...
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah. There's no reduction. It's more, if anything, it's not a reduction, it's a throwing the doors open and including. It is round, it is an orange. It's also not round, it's also not an orange. It's also none of the above. And also anything else you can say or think about it, and also everything else that you can't say or think about it, and also, so it's not a question of it's a question of yes, it is, and more, and more, and more. It's endless inclusion. So whichever version you end up sitting with is absolutely fine. It's round and it's an orange, and those are concepts. Cool. It's not round, it's not orange, and those aren't, and this is not a concept. Cool. You know, it's radiant presence. Cool. You know, it costs too much. Cool. I mean, so in other words, wherever you go is equally true, equally relevant, and there's no hierarchy of getting down to some basic truth, or it's not really that, it's really this. You know, there's no, it's really. You can't ever get to an it's really. You're always it's like peeling the layers of an onion. You're always at some indeterminate layer, and there's always more layers. And that, since there's always more layers, whatever layer you happen to be at, as good as any other layer, you're the layer, and you peel up 10,000, you back up and push back to 100,000 layers, and you're the layer. And so, since there's no last layer and there's no first layer, what difference does it make which particular layer you happen to be at? In other words, there's not a hierarchy of truth or hierarchy of profundity. So that this is round and is an orange is exactly as profound and true as that it is absolutely nothing transcendental divine presence. It's the same thing from a different perspective. Exactly the same thing. And the one is not better or worse than the other. And if you happen to have a preference for one or the other, that's cool too. And if you feel a personal engagement and a motivation to play with it in certain ways, and the frustration of your own limitations and being able to do that, that's cool too. That's just a reflection of your nature as a manifest energy system, which you didn't decide to have or be is just enacting itself, whatever. And so the whole thing is just another question mark. But it's not like that's bad and you have to get to something else that's better. There's no hierarchy of value. There's no hierarchy even of truth, which is a strange condition. You know?
And so I'm not just reduced to this feeling.
I
am, but I'm not. I'm still a body, I'm still, or I am, but I'm not. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so any perspective that seems to present, yeah, exactly. Any perspective that seems to present itself is fine and doesn't actually preclude any other perspective that may coexist, even if they don't work with each other, even if they cancel each other out. So it's not like you need to take sides. It's not like you need to find a perspective that trumps all the other perspectives. It's like it just doesn't matter. It's just an open game, and any view can play. And even if they completely are antagonistic to each other.
Yeah, I think reducing stuff to the way it feels is probably a really good starting point for.
Well, yes
for a
and
lot
no.
of
It depends. It can be an interesting game to play, an interesting exploration. But if you're going to feeling as opposed to or excluding something else that you're defining as not feeling, then that's a little iffy.
I was thinking, feeling the way something feels versus judgment or conclusion.
Yeah. Well, okay. What we're really talking about is it can be useful as an exploratory technique to be with things in an alternative way than you used to. Not that the alternative way is ultimately superior. Its advantage is that it gets you out of your normalcy. So if you're used to sitting here thinking, looking at the world and thinking about it, then you might try, okay, why don't you just feel the presence of the world instead? And it's not because feeling the presence of the world is better, just because you're not used to doing it. So it forces you out of your rut of dullness and normalcy, out of your self-image of who you are and what you're doing into no man's land, and then you don't know what you're doing, and not knowing what you're doing is that's a really good way to prime the pump. I mean, find yourself out of your depth by hook or by crook, as if you're doing yourself a favor in this work.
Precisely when I don't know what I'm doing is when I'm trying to fight to impose structure to
of course.
what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and those both they can coexist. Part of you can be trying to impose structure, even as part of you is not knowing what you're doing.
And it's always like I am afraid to go down under that cloud of unknowing or whatever, as opposed to like I want to stay on top of things, have a perspective.
But it's fine to do that. But even when you're doing that, you're also, even when you're being with things rationally or analytically, let's say, you're also being with things irrationally and in terms of other modes of experience.
It's not, I mean,
you may not be identifying with that portion of yourself, but that's always happening.
So it's not just rational and analytic, even if it is just a cloud of sensations. If it is a blob, amorphous and stuff, there's still a sense of a separateness that wants to maintain itself.
That's okay. So there's a sense of, so here's the blob of amorphous whatever, and here's the separateness maintaining itself. Okay.
So then
they don't have to, just because they don't make sense in terms of each other, doesn't mean it's a problem. There can be alternative modes or alternative dimensions that are incompatible that can coexist. Why not? I mean, this is of the essence of what self-inquiry consists of. Because when we look at ourselves, we discover that we are complex. We coexist on many different levels simultaneously, and these levels aren't necessarily coherent or working with each other or making sense in terms of each other. We're very irrational and fragmented entities that are doing different things on different levels, not necessarily working together are not necessarily making sense. And in some cases, erratically so. In some cases, like people who have self-defeating, self-destructive behaviors and things like, whatever. And so noticing this is very valuable because, of course, the ego likes to pretend we're integrated and we have a handle and, I'm really, and I'm really functional and you're doing my best. And that's fine too. So the portion of the being which is doing that is, okay, so that's there. But that doesn't mean that there's not all sorts of other modes that are present simultaneously that are not like that.
So when this noticing is happening and there is a sense of separateness, you're saying that, okay, despite this, the seeming nature of this, and though at the moment it seems like I'm trying to fight the separateness and stuff, you're saying that noticing helps because it also opens the doors to these other things that are.
Yes, exactly. You notice that there's alternatives present. So, for example, there's the coherence that's there. There's, let's say, some incoherence there. Then there's another part that's trying to fight with the one. Okay, so that's there. And then if you look, you maybe find some other incoherence that's there, or something else that's there, or maybe some, some desire, whatever, I don't know. And so there's all of these different energies that are findable, and they're doing what they're doing, and maybe there's tension between them, maybe they're fighting, maybe they're trying to have a hierarchy to be dominant, or one of them's trying to win, and it may or may not be succeeding. And so you see that, and it's like a reality check. It's not trying to achieve a desired condition, it's just like taking inventory of what is present. So sort of it's just being honest, settling, opening to what is actually present, however that happens to be. And because of the way human psychology works, the psychology is often very heavily censorious. It censors its version of things. It wants to pretend that things are a certain way. And from that point of view, which is fine again from that point of view, but that version is not very accurate. There's all sorts of other things going on which are not actually the way that the ego wants to assert that they are.
The image I keep getting is of a group of people sitting around in a drawing class, and the model's in the center, and everybody's got a different perspective, and some people have watercolors, and some people have colored pencils, and some people, and it's just, there's nothing to put your finger on, and that's how it is.
Yeah, and that's
me.
And that's you, you're every one of those. You're simultaneously doing all these alternative things, and not in a way that necessarily is talking to any other ways that are doing other alternative things, and the whole thing is just going along.
And if it's a 30-minute focus, I may want to get up and run around four different perspectives.
In short, the entity is fabulously incoherent, which is contrary to the way we're used to thinking of ourselves. We're used to thinking of ourselves as having some degree of coherence or, togetherness or integration or whatever. And in actuality, this is not true. And so noticing that is powerful and empowering. It's just a reality check, because the way psychology works, again, psychology plays favorites. We have portions of our energy which we like, and we have other portions that we don't like, or we're ashamed of, or what have you. But because of that suppression or negativity, we don't let ourselves access and draw upon the inherent strengths and assets of those natures, even if they are contrary to what we like or what's socially acceptable or what have you. So by opening to everything that you actually are, rather than your preferred version of yourself, you get access to the full treasure house of what you actually consist of.
I don't get it, but we're nothing, so we.
Well, we're nothing, but you're also whatever you are. It's not like you're nothing, so everything else gets canceled out. You're nothing, but there's also impulses, and there's also feeling, and there's also, whatever. There's emotion. There's all these things may be there, and from another perspective, it's all nothing, and from another perspective, it's everything. And from another perspective, it's just someone struggling through their life trying to make sense. And so there's all these different perspectives, and it's all on the table. It's all, it's just different versions of the same thing.
So would you say the best way to see this is to be mindful, basically, like most of the, like to recognize, to see these things, like?
The best way to see it is less to be mindful and more to just be honest and loose. Be honest and loose, just let go, be yourself, and yeah, this is me, I'm me, and then, but let yourself be honest about aspects that show up, rather than trying to prefer one. Like you might prefer, I'm nobody, I'm nothing. Okay, cool. You're nobody, you're nothing, but you also might get pissed off sometimes, and so that's there too. Or, whatever. I mean, everyone's different. But so the point is to open the doors to anything that might show up, and that's there too. And the fact that they don't fit in with each other doesn't matter. So the fact that you're nothing, and the fact that you're whatever else is like, okay, so that makes no sense, but so what? Who said anything had to make sense?
So many things are coming up listening to you today, Peter. Oh my goodness, where do I start? So 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with a rare cancer. And just sitting here and listening to you speak, it's like, as much as I tried to put my imprint on what was arising every day for me, which was just excruciating pain and pain and pain and pain. And I saw over 200 doctors, blah, blah, blah. Once, so I'm just thinking about what you're saying. It's like, there was no me in all of that. There was just this, moving through this, in order to experience the reality of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always the case. Whatever circumstances are presenting are your vehicle, or let's say your channel of moving into yourself. So what you are is endlessly moving into itself forever. I mean, literally timelessly, forever, beyond space and time. So, from before the beginning of time till after the end of time, it's just you moving into yourself. And whatever seems to occur or present as an event is just the conduit or the vehicle for that moving in. You might think of it in terms of whatever's appropriate at that time or whatever, who knows. Yeah, absolutely. Cancer's a great reality check. It makes you get honest real fast.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And now I look at everything and I see God in everything. Everything sparkles.
Yeah.
I teach yoga, and I don't care whether 5 people come to the class or 40 people come to the class. I'm just holding the space, and there's not a me, there's just this arising.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, how do I get cancer?
Just send your money to the I Want Cancer hotline. Operators are standing by.
I've heard you use the word divine, so it probably just came up in the moment. But sometimes I feel like if this is the divine, then the divine and cancer, what an asshole.
Yeah, the divine, God does everything. So God's the ultimate asshole, as well as the ultimate benevolent. And from a human point of view, we have a value system where pleasure is good, pain is bad, success is good, failure is bad, and health is good. Blah blah. This whole thing. But of course, reality doesn't work reality doesn't look at like that. From reality's point of view, creation and destruction are just aspects of the same process. So health and disease are aspects of the same process. So difficulty, I mean, it's an obvious truism that challenges and difficulties can build character, or can be vehicles of development. Whereas having everything easy all the time can be a vehicle of stagnation, so on and so forth. So at any rate, the fact that all sorts of different qualities of events can occur and manifestly reality is doing them doesn't make reality a bad guy, just makes reality interested in a process which is transhuman, which is not concerned necessarily with human value systems of what we would think would be better or worse, but its value system of what it's trying to do, which I would say can be poetically described as it moving into itself, or it deepening into itself, and learning of itself.
Where I experience no issue with all the suffering that this body mind has gone through, I always come to a point of the pain, the bodily pain.
Yeah.
But I would say that everything I've been through, I'm grateful to my tormentors, because it made me stop. And now listening to you, I suddenly realized my suffering was more trying to connect the dots than actually trying to make sense of it as the suffering.
Yeah, that's always the case, yeah.
And now there's so much freedom, and from what I'm hearing today, it's like, finally there is no separation. Even though I've been listening to all the speakers and very grateful for every one of them, I've always thought, well, if I'm getting rid of the self, then there's separation somehow, and I can't, so all of those words are starting to make more sense here. But I did bring up the asshole pain thing, because I haven't really suffered pain. I've suffered other things. So one thing
It's early days yet. Early days yet. Don't worry. Count your blessings.
But thank you.
I heard a story that someone asked Ramakrishna one time, why is there evil in the world? And there was this long pause, and he says, to thicken the plot. You go on Netflix and watch all the movies that are there. What would if there's no evil in those movies? It'd be kind of no entertainment, no plot.
It'd be Seinfeld.
Yeah, that's probably from Seinfeld, yeah.
Well, interestingly, as one comes into more and more into the true perspective, one essentially relates less and less to a human perspective and more to the perspective of energy presence. And there is a lot there, bad and evil and ugly and all these things just disappear as relevant qualities. And what there are is just interesting patterns. There's so many interesting patterns and textures. It's like the ultimate art form or the ultimate light show. And it doesn't qualify itself in terms of a good pattern or a bad pattern or a winning pattern or a losing pattern. It's just interesting as hell. And the interest, an aspect of the interest is the way that patterns move into other patterns, which move into other patterns. And I mean, the whole thing is this astounding dance. It's like watching some kind of a free dance where it's not telling any particular story. It's just movement, but it's just so rich and so. You watch something move into something else, and it's just delightful. In an irrational, inexpressible, but very pithy and immediate way. And that's what experience is. From a human point of view, we're used to sort of playing a value score of, am I winning or losing? Is this happy? Am I happy or sad? Am I in pleasure or pain or whatever? But of course, experience isn't really like that. Experience is just weirdness moving into weirdness, moving into weirdness. And as the more clearly one comes to settle into seeing that, the more it's experienced on that level. And again, the human aspect isn't negated. Yeah, you can say, oh, that you stub your toe, and you can say, shit, that hurt. Wish I hadn't done that. But at the same time, the pattern of it is amazing. A stubbed toe is just like this gorgeous fireworks show, and I mean, it's just amazing.
So looking back at the so-called suffering, and now I see through those eyes that see the pithiness of it, or the interesting patterns and all the people involved. When I start to talk about it, people will say, you're in your story.
right? And so that's kind of like a, what is that?
Well, people say all kinds of things. People are nuts. Don't pay them much mind, I recommend.
That's why I say you almost are speechless after a while. You're always in your stories somehow.
Yeah. Well, no matter how you're being with your experience, you're free to bullshit with other people, and they might not notice.
So would you say in the context of noticing though that the story is important because that is where a lot of your energy is at the moment?
Well, yeah, if that is there, then yeah, you acknowledge it, or you notice that is present. It's not a matter of, it's not trying to suppress something or steer it, just take, it's like taking inventory, but a really honest inventory, but not, again, not analytically, but just an inventory of feeling what is actually present, just instantaneously. Much of which is irrational or is, textures or feelings or what have you. And much of it may be also, with stories and emotions and hopefulness and all these various kinds of things. That's going to be present too. Because that's obviously modes in which actuality manifests.
If there are some plot lines along which different modes can be allowed to manifest. Like for instance, I used to have stories, and I still do, they didn't go away. But then I'd look at the energy concerned with the story, not look at the analytic process itself. And so then what happens is, okay, there's always bubbling, and then there's settling down.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, a trigger, and the same story comes up again.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, does, and so on and so forth. Until somebody, I shrink actually. So he kind of set me on to this person, Katie Byron's work,
Mm-hmm.
which was interesting in the sense they kind of make you forcefully wear different hats.
Right.
So in those modes, different energies that are connected with, that are underlying, they seem to be exposed in a clearer way.
Right.
And so that particular story seems to dissolve at some level.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So now, would you say that that dissolution was less healthy in terms of like it being guided, or
it doesn't matter. I would say it's not. I don't think that's particularly powerful. I think that the work of Byron Katie is very useful on its own level, but I would say the point isn't to dissolve stories or to counteract stories or to disprove them, but to show how the narrative portion of experience, or the portion of experience which let's say works with stories, is a very small portion of the experience, and it coexists with much more with other portions which are not involved and not approaching experience in that way. And if you do that, the stories solve themselves not by disproving them or deconstructing them, but by noticing that they're much smaller than you're used to thinking they are. In other words, ordinarily one might walk around and really be, obsessed with, oh, darn, this is going on and it really bothers me or whatever, right? But that seems very important because it's being focused on. Whereas if one takes an inventory of the fullness of one's experience and discovers that the portion of the mind which is looking at these stories is actually a fairly small portion, and there's so many other areas or dimensions of the experience which are not working like that at all, then if proportionately it recedes in size. You discover it's actually a fairly small portion of your experience, and as it seemed to be smaller than you first thought it was, it also becomes less important than you thought it was. So it doesn't solve the problem by solving the problem. It solves the problem by rendering it less relevant.
Even though people keep living out of these reactivities.
But they aren't really.
They aren't.
No. That's only a very small portion that is doing that, that's all describable on that level of story analysis. In actual fact, people live out of their direct energy involvement. People do what they want to do because they want to do it. And then there may be stories and reactivity and in the spin doctoring and all that may also be going on. But people's functioning and motivation is completely irrational. People do what they do because they do it. Is the bottom line. And then the stories and all that is more or less after the fact.
But what you're saying, would it be like they're doing not because there's an entity that wants to do it as in, but then in the sense we use the word choice, like
Right.
they choose to do it.
Right.
But it's rather just manifesting itself.
Yes, I
And
think.
you're there just watching it happen.
Yes, because motivation comes out of the nature. What you're motivated to do comes out of ultimately what you are. What I'm motivated to do comes out of what I am. And the things that I would want to do are going to be probably different than the things you want to do, and so on and so forth, because everyone's unique. And so motivation particularly comes out of the nature, and it's not rational. There may be rational processes associated with it, but that's, again, that's not really at the level of motivation. That's more at the level of analysis, which is sort of trying to fine tune.
But when you say nature, again, that is cause and effect, right?
No, everything. This is difficult to talk about. Everything's difficult to talk about. This is difficult to talk about. Every energy system has its nature. This is just exactly like this. This is just exactly like this. This is not like this. This is not like this. I am just exactly like this. You are just exactly like this. This is not like this. This is not like this. You know, if I drop this, something happens. If I drop this, something else happens. If you behave, something will happen. If I behave, something else will happen. Because the nature of what you are dictates the way you manifest in the world. And you already are what you are, because you can say karmically or whatever, but that's just putting words on it. But so everything has its own unique nature, let's say at that instant at least. And every aspect of the way you are in the world is a manifestation of that nature, or you could say an expression of that nature. And no two people are the same. You know, everyone in here wants to do different things. You know, if I said, you know, you can, for the next hour, you have magic powers and you can do anything you want and no one will ever know. Just prove you're going to go up to some world and have some incredible experience happening just because you want it to happen. Each one of you will go to a different world and do something different because your nature is what it is. You know, we're not just plain vanilla. It's easy to think, oh, we're all the same. People are plain vanilla. Nothing could be further from the truth. People are unique, and not because they want to be or they made themselves that way. It just happens to be the case. But every atom is unique. Every object is unique. You know, this is not like this. This is not like this. This is not like this. You know, this part of this is not like this part of this. So no matter how much you zoom in or how wide you zoom out, you always find difference in manifest energy systems. Or another way to put it, if you want to put it subjectively, if you look in the field of your experience, every portion of your experience is different from every other portion of your experience. So if you take your field of vision, for example, and you take a particular, you know, this point here and this point here, the colors that's there and here are different. The shapes that here are here and different. And different than here and here and here. You can't find sameness anywhere. So wherever you zoom into actuality, you find uniqueness that is different from all of the uniqueness you find if you zoomed in somewhere else. And again, this is not a precise way to put it, but it's indicative of one of the prime aspects of the way energy organizes itself.
Then would you say that, given all of this information density, you zoom out to look at where it's all coming from?
Well, you can zoom out or in, because it's not coming from outside or coming from inside. It comes from itself. So anywhere, if you zoomed in, that is coming from itself. You can look at an atom, and that atom, the energy, the being of that atom is coming from what the atom itself is, right there. And if you zoom out and look at the solar system or the biosphere, it's the same thing. So the scale doesn't change, how radical, how much it is coming at the essence, or how primal it is. Anyway, this is getting a little abstract, but it's interesting in terms of, notice the uniqueness of every portion of your experience. Every portion of your experience is different than every other portion of experience spatially and in time. So, in other words, what I experience right here and what I experience right here now is different because it changes continuously. Nothing stays the same for any duration. And what I'm experiencing right here and what I experience right here is different because nothing is the same across space. So space and time are you could say, are indices of absolute differentiation. Which sounds abstract, but if you look at it, it's very concrete and obviously true. And this applies to what seems to present in a certain locus. So I can take this locus and loosely define it as Peter Brown, and so the flavor of what is there changes over time, and different portions of it are different from each other spatially. So what's here, Peter Brown here, and Peter Brown here is different. But if I sort of zoom to the point of just taking this as a whole whole entity right here, it has a certain nature and flavor, which will manifest and express itself in its functioning, in its manifestation. It looks like what it looks, because it is that way. It acts like what it acts, because it is that way, and so on and so forth. And the same with this piece of dust on the floor. It looks like what it looks because it is that way, and it acts like what it acts because it is that way. Or if there was an ant on the wall, it doesn't matter where you look at, anywhere you find a manifest energy system, i.e. an object of experience, you will discover this curious phenomenon.
So it's snowflakes all the way down.
Yeah, snowflakes. That's a very good analogy.
Never alike.
Never alike. And because each snowflake is the way it is, it falls the way it falls.
So you're saying just be yourself, or that's what you meant?
Well, I'm saying you cannot be yourself.
No, but I mean, yeah, like it's different.
And you being yourself, no one else is going to do that.
Yeah,
They
but
can't.
I'm not a self though, right?
Well, yeah, but okay, you not being not the self, no one else is going to do that.
Yeah, well, that's right. No,
That's just
no, I'm just saying, no, it's like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything, it's popular to think we're all the
So
same.
we're not, but
we're not.
who you are, be who you are, but even though you're nobody.
Yeah,
be who
you're
you
that.
are.
Yeah. The nobody that you are, the nobody that you are is not like the nobody that anyone else is.
I missed that.
The nobody that you are is not like the nobody that anybody else is. So you're nobody and I'm nobody, but you're nobody, you're nobody, I'm me nobody.
And in that's how we're the same. Or in that.
Well, we're the same because the way it works is exactly the same.
Yeah.
And what it ultimately is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Radiance is interesting because radiance, it never departs from itself. In other words, it never becomes anything other than radiance. Nothing is here but radiance is infinitely differentiated within itself. It's a very peculiar phenomenon. So there's one thing here, and it looks infinitely different than itself across space and time. So, which again is very irrational. You would, since it looks different, you would think it would be different, but it isn't actually like that. It's one thing. They're kind of like in a dream, there's only one thing present, dreaming, but it can look like anything. And you never dream the same thing twice. But it never becomes anything other than dream. It never departs from itself. It never becomes more than just dream. But it's infinitely differentiated within itself. And this is the nature of what this is made of. What this is here. And everything that we can talk about or think about is just that phenomena happening.
So we heard a plane just go overhead. Before thought came in to say, well, that's a plane, there's just hearing.
Yeah.
The cars drive by, it's
Yeah.
just sound.
The hearing is energy, experiential energy. The thought and analysis is experiential energy. Everything that happens is just experiential energy. It's all the same energy. All you ever experience, basically all you experience is just an energy field presenting itself. And there's nothing present but that, or this.
And this is just now. We assume there's
Here
a
now.
world outside of this building going on, but there's really just this.
Yeah. This here now.
So oftentimes when I get really caught up in interpretive frameworks or even deconstructing them, just really caught up in mental stuff. Sometimes remember to kind of defocus or whatever, and just experience being, presence, whatever. I know there's next to nothing, or maybe nothing you can say about what this really is, but I find it comforting what you sometimes at least imply that whatever this is, it is unending and eternal. Can you say that absolutely with confidence, or is
Yes.
Is that just a tool? Yeah?
Well, no, absolutely.
That is something you definitely can say, is that whatever this is, it is unending.
Well, it's ending and beginning are very interesting concepts. And ending cannot be found and beginning cannot be found as actualities, they're abstractions. You can't find an actual beginning and you can't find an actual end, experientially. And more to the point, in terms of, let's say, in terms of the actuality of your experience, space and time happen in your experience. Your experience is timeless, not in some abstract sense, but in the sense that it is invariable. It does not change. It does not come and go. It has no beginning and no ending, or even any middle that you can find. And yet, because of your experience, seeming time can appear within it, and seeming space can appear within it. But time and space exist because you exist, not the other way around. You don't exist in space. Space exists in you. For example, you go to sleep and you start dreaming and say you're on the rim of the Grand Canyon, whatever. I mean, you're somewhere. Now, the space that you're in when you're dreaming, where do they come from? And when the dream's over, the space disappears. And now you wake up and all of a sudden there's this space. Where did this space come from? And we're used to thinking, no, this is the real space. This space is really here. But of course, if you look at it experientially, this space wasn't here. And then it is, seemingly. Although if you look for it, you can't really pin it down. So is it here? You can't answer that question. But okay, let's just be generous and say, okay, space is here. But there was a time when it wasn't. There was a time when it was another space. And you go to sleep at night, this space is gone. Where are you then? I don't know. But wherever you are is appearing in you. You're not appearing in it. You may have avatars appearing in it. I mean, I may say, this body is my manifestation and is appearing in this space-time. Okay, maybe. But all of that is happening in me. I'm not happening in it. And so if time is occurring in you, how can you be subject to time? I mean, and you can imagine there might be some kind of a meta time that you exist in. But that's something you can only imagine in yourself. So again, that idea can exist only because you exist. So it's dependent upon you, not the other way around. And you can't find a beginning to yourself. There's no point where you began. You can't find an ending to yourself. There's no point where you end. These qualities are not relevant. They're abstractions that are unfindable.
Right. I guess I just haven't developed enough sort of experiential confidence in that quality of it.
Yeah.
So it's just comforting to know that that is something I can say about it.
Yeah, I mean, the more you play with this stuff, the more you have yourself, the less your self-image will tend to gravitate towards your persona or your physical body, and the more it will be oriented towards the experiential field. And the experiential field exists independently of what appears in it, just like the TV exists independently of what shows up in the show.
But can never be recognized without the show, right?
Well, the show never, there's always a show on.
Right.
TV never shuts off. So the show is a good starting point of checking out the TV. Because the show is very distracting and the TV is relatively boring. The show is very eventful. There's all of this sound and fury and light and color and event. Whereas if you look at the field of experience itself, it's sort of it's an acquired taste, let's say, in terms of an object of interest.
That part is interesting though. I coincidentally have my TV and my meditation room next to each other. And
very practical.
And I look towards Netflix more often.
Sure.
And so, but when I am doing Netflix, the immediate impression is that, just looking at experience itself, it's boring.
Yeah.
Experiencing it's a little more alive, the stories, everything goes
Sure.
up. But then when I have sat down to meditate, at that point, there is all of this dynamic that is happening that is so vivid, and the sense of not just partial stories like I would be engaged in Netflix, but the whole thing coming together.
Mm-hmm.
That seems so much richer, not as partial narrative, but even in experience.
Yeah.
So, and then there, the perspective is that, Netflix is so drab compared to this, right?
Yeah.
And so, where do these perspectives draw their energies from? It seems like if I'm pulled this way or that way.
Well, yeah.
It's not like I'm looking at Netflix and then I'm like kind of thinking, oh wow, this whole experience, including this partial story, is rich.
Right.
I mean, it might come in blips, but, but it's not the mainstay of that experience.
Right. Well, it all comes from you. I mean, it comes from what you are. So in other words, the investment in Netflix or the appreciation of a richer meditative experience is all your being with yourself in different ways. Because when you're with Netflix, you're basically just with your experience of Netflix. Of Netflix is the story, but your experience is the fact, even if you're looking at a TV. And the same with the meditation. So it's just you being with your experience in different ways, exploring yourself. Which is all that is happening here. What you are is exploring itself via your experience. And all of your experience is just different modes of the way it can present itself.
Peter, you said something like experiential field and self-image. I didn't grasp that. Can you?
Well, psychologically, you could say one tends to have a sense of oneself, and most, we could say the dominant human mode might be where one has a sense of oneself as a body image or a personality image that's both of which are imaginary figments that are held in the mind. And there's this spontaneous self-identification mechanism, let's suppose. And as one progresses in this kind of an investigation, one gets more and more of a sense of oneself, less in terms of body and personality, and more in terms of the presence of the experiential field. Now, this will be the last question before lunch, because I know it gets a little numbing to do this stuff unendingly.
Going back to what you said about the background, the screen being an acquired taste.
Yeah.
And also I'm just feeling kind of one nodey today, unresolvability. Just this ongoing feeling of expectation, waiting for something, essentially the end of dissatisfaction or some hope for permanent satisfaction.
Yeah.
Is it just a matter of snapping out of it and stop looking for Santa Claus, or?
Well, it's kind of like sensitivity training, one projects or imagines an end to satisfaction, to dissatisfaction, as a contrast with the presence of dissatisfaction.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
One projects and imagines an end to dissatisfaction by contrast to the presence of dissatisfaction. So here's my life and it sucks. And boy, I can imagine, wouldn't it be nice if that would stop? But as one progresses in noticing, which doesn't deal with that directly, but deals with it obliquely by looking at the nature of experience itself, but nonetheless does in fact address that issue. And one comes to see that dissatisfaction is of the nature of the energy pattern, because all the patterns are never complete, they never resolve into anything, and they always decompose, and they never achieve any finality. So basically, in terms of experiential energy forms, there's nothing but dissatisfaction. There's nothing is ever, a finality is never achieved, a resting place is never achieved. It's just some pattern that's implying something, changes to something else that implies something else, changes to something else that implies something else, and it's like a never-ending, pile of garbage falling down an eternal staircase or something. It doesn't ever hit bottom, and it doesn't ever come together as anything particularly elegant. And the more one looks at one's experience directly, outside of the context of objects and stories and circumstances, but just at the patterns which present as the actual experiential object, one comes to see this principle very, very clearly. And one discovers that ongoing dissatisfaction, ongoing non-finality, ongoing irresolution is of the very essence of actuality. And so then the projection of the fantasy of some resolution or some completeness or some finality is seen to be just a pure fantasy. And even that fantasy can't sustain itself, because it itself is also, of course, an experiential pattern which is continually morphing and moving into a state of degeneration. And so as one comes more and more clearly to see this, one is gradually extricated from thinking of it as a problem, and one develops sensitivity to think of it as interesting. As it's like watching patterns of clouds in the sky. They're never going to get to anything. It's going to be one weird shape that's almost this, and then it's becoming that, and then it's becoming that, and it's not like it's going anywhere or coming from anywhere. It's just weird shapes, moving into each other. And of course, all of experience is exactly that. As you age, you watch your body falling apart, and you watch circumstances, you watch politics, you watch society, you watch physical objects, you watch the house you're living in fall apart. You watch all of these things, and all of these shapes and patterns are continually just moving through variations and morphs of themselves, never coming from anything particularly coherent, not going to anything particularly coherent. And you get that, wow, that's what we got, that's what we are, that's what there is here. And you come to see, your aesthetic sense recalibrates itself, and you come to see the beauty of that and the fascination of that, rather than holding that as a negative or as a problem, and holding the resolution of that as the antidote to the problem, which is where the whole dissatisfaction and hope for satisfaction dichotomy is related.
So it's sort of like with no real solution to this, then
When you
the
see
problem disappears.
exactly, when you discover there's no solutions, how could there be problems? There's just endless weirdness moving into endless weirdness, moving into endless weirdness. Where's the problem? Where's the solution? And on that note, why don't we knock off for lunch? So it is right now about 12:20. Why don't we try and reconvene sometime around 2-ish? There's, those of you that don't know the neighborhood, there's various little restaurants around here. And if you want to drive, there's more restaurants around here. So if you don't know where you're going, follow someone that looks like they do.
We're gonna be locking the door, so.
Oh, well.